it's Maria, and welcome to the Breaking Up with Toxicity podcast. Thank you for being with me today. Each week, I will connect with people as they share relatable life experiences. We will talk about and at times challenge reoccurring unhealthy and toxic patterns that keep you from the changes you want to see as you break these unhealthy cycles. So let's get started and see where this show will take us today. Be sure to listen and don't forget to follow so that you never miss an episode. Hi, John. Welcome back to the show. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Maria. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be back.
Great. In our previous show, I picked up on a few comments that you made and that you actually found challenging. And they were things that you had experienced. One question that has stuck with me was when I asked you about why you paid for that dinner, and your reply was because it was the respectful thing to do. And you yourself even challenged, was it the right thing to do? Is it something that you wanted to do? And it has to do with expectations. So I wanted to know if we can revisit that question again and what your thoughts were about it and how your girlfriend felt about it also.
Of course. First off, that specific question lingered with me, and I asked myself, why did I do it, right? And I think you kind of really left me off with why, right? That's the number one question.
Right.
I completely wasn't interested, and I think I did it predominantly because of my upbringing, right? I got an older sister. I've seen her go on dates. I've seen cousins who are like sisters to me go on dates, and they're always like, "Yeah, well, at least he paid for dinner. I didn't have to pay for dinner. It was a crappy date, blah blah blah," right? And I'm just like, you know what? At least if it's something. And I kind of look back at it and like saying, "Oh man, I really could have probably saved that extra $100 in my pocket and probably could have spent it on myself." Or maybe just thinking as far as, hey, it really does seem like the right thing to do. I just think, again, like this date happened over 10 years ago. And for me at that time, that was the genuine and respectful thing that I could at least do from a, first date perspective and only date perspective.
Right. Well, it was what we call an expectation. So an expectation is you go out on the date and the gentleman thing to do is to pay for that date. So let me ask you something. What are expectations?
Another tough question. Expectations. I really think expectations really have to do a lot with, let's say, your upbringing too. I think people's expectations completely change because in a lot of cultures, people would probably think, hey, that is the only way to do things, right? You have to pay for the woman's first meal, at least, especially going out with them. But a lot of times, other places, maybe it's not such a serious thing.
Well, it depends what the situation is. Expectations, we all have them. They are
Hmm.
healthy, they can be unhealthy. And it's up to each individual person to decide if it's unhealthy for them or not. And that can be a struggle for many people because if you were going to do something with your family, there might be an expectation that you have to invite extended family. Does that really mean though that you want to do it? And or you're just doing it because it's an expectation of you from what you know if that's the right thing to do.
There's been plenty of times to where you have to send an invite because it's a core belief. It's
Who
and
who
maybe it's a cultural thing too. Maybe it's a cultural background as well too.
how? How?
Because you technically have to invite, let's say for certain people, right? You have to invite someone there because that's your direct relative, that's your first cousin. Let's say for instance, you have to directly invite them to your wedding. Whereas in other cultures, a lot of it's just like, well, I don't care. I don't talk to them. Why do I need to invite them? And I think it depends on where your upbringing is. So let's say, like my culture specifically, I'm inviting the world. Let's say to my wedding, the whole world is coming. Anybody
You're go
listening to this, you probably can have an invitation too. Just show up to the venue. All right. But to be honest with you, it's different. And I actually want to piggyback. My best friend is actually getting married next year. And my father asked him, he was like, "Oh, how many people are specifically coming to your wedding?" He was like, "Oh, maybe about 200." He was like, "Really, 200 people just on your side?" He goes, "No, no, 200 combined."
for
And
the
my
entire
dad
event.
for the entire event. And my father was like, really? He's never really heard of 200 people. 200 people is just one side of one of my parents' families.
Mhm.
And he was just kind of shell shocked, and he's like, "What about like your cousins and stuff?" He goes, "Well, one side of my family, like my first cousins over there, I don't really know them. They never even gave a chance to try and, talk to me. My uncles, I know them. I don't really know their kids. So it's kind of like, why would I invite them? So you're seeing two different types of cultural, upbringings, whereas one is kind of doing things like, hey, I'm doing it from this perspective of if I know you personally, and the other one is doing it more of a respect or
Well,
a.
how's that I'm gonna challenge you on this now. You open this, right?
I opened up a can of worms. Oh boy.
Yeah.
Here we go.
How is that respect, though? I
Uh,
mean, try to dissect it.
Ready? I think this is listen. If it was my way, I don't think I'd elope. I'd probably go to like the courthouse and save all that money on myself and go on a month-long vacation.
To conform to the expectation of what's
Yes,
expected of you.
yes. That I don't think I have much of a say. I've got too many people against me on that one, and I'm going to admit that might be a fault that you've probably already seen.
So you're
Uh,
not going to be your authentic self. Let me describe something and tell me if I'm right or wrong. Let me start off with asking you, do
sure.
you know what an enmeshed family is?
Yeah. I know the example. I know a little bit of it. Let's say, like, a mother calls her son's, ex-girlfriend and asks why she broke up with him. Just wanting to know the information, or like just pretty much being nosy. That's kind of like what my example is as far as it goes.
Hmm. An enmeshed family is common with actually many different ethnicities. And it
Hmm.
describes a family a relationship of a family that lacks boundaries. Right? The roles and expectations of each person, it can get confusing where parents do overstep boundaries and they can be sometimes even inappropriate, sharing too much personal information. They're looking for support from their children. And their children, usually what happens is their children are not really taught or allowed to be emotionally independent for themselves away from their
Hmm.
parents. How do I want to say this? Fuse like together. So they don't respect privacy. They, like I said earlier, they rely on children for their emotional support. Most children do not get to make decisions. They may make some, but overall the decisions are made for them. Their children are not encouraged to explore their own identities. So sometimes immaturity lasts a little bit longer. It's because the parents didn't allow their kids to separate from them, giving that
Hmm.
independence and confidence. So does
Yep.
that sound familiar to you?
Yeah, in a sense. In a sense, yes. I think with the whole inviting, right? We go back to the story as far as inviting for my buddy's wedding, or let's say my wedding, whatever. I'm not even engaged yet. Is the funny part. And everybody's already all talking about that. But again, the whole thing is, oh, we got to invite so and so. I haven't seen them in 10 years. Why do I have to invite them? Oh, it's out of respect, and that's them kind of
Whose respect?
that it's theirs. It's theirs. It's their, again, for me, it's like I don't know. I don't necessarily know. I don't know this person. Why would I want them at my place? I agree with my best friend. Um, so I'm kind of in the middle of the roads, and I think I'll win a few battles here and there when the seating arrangements and invitations go out. But as far as anything else, I might be losing a few battles there, and I think it's has to go with the involvement of my parents in my life, as far as saying, like you just mentioned, with the enmeshment, not letting go and not letting them, letting their specific kids be, that person or what they truly can be, or like, let me be that flower I want to be, so to say.
It's not let you, it's let them be.
Yeah,
Yes, no, maybe. Because
maybe
it's
maybe
not
I
about you. You know this.
no, it's not. I think again, it's more about them, and it's because when they were getting married, you can probably attest to this. When they were getting married, they didn't have no say to who the heck got invited to their wedding. So now it's like, oh, now I'm gonna do this way. I want to do it that way, and it's like their involvement. It's kind of like them living their lives through their children.
To an extent, for various different reasons. I'm going to go back to enmeshment. Do you know where enmeshment comes from?
No.
More likely than not, and I'm not saying this is all the time, but it is a higher probability. It happens with people who had traumatic upbringings. And now trauma, that varies because that means something different for everyone. It can be a physical injury, it can be a natural disaster, an accident, a job loss, anything, assault, abuse is one of
Hmm.
them, whether verbal, psychological, sexual. And because it happens to, a person, it doesn't necessarily mean it will impact their quality of life, but maybe for somebody else it does.
Seriously,
So
seriously.
trauma impacts everyone differently. Adolescent was bullied in school. Some kids, they grow up and they don't care. Other people, it has impacted them. Why does it impact some people more than others? Because it has to do with your environment. And within your environment is your family, what
Hmm.
they will project onto you. Now, talking, let's say your parents' generation, most people didn't have the support or the opportunity to address whatever trauma they experienced in their lives. So, growing up, they did the best of what they knew and had the ability to make whatever changes that they could, but staying within what was expected, but not really understanding where is this expectation coming from.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
Trauma does a lot of things for people, and it's the severity of the trauma that impacts somebody. And trauma can be inflicted by words. And why I'm bringing up words is because within our culture, there was and still is a very high rate of narcissistic personality and borderline personality. Most people focus on narcissistic personality. And so somebody's narcissistic, we know what they do, we know exactly what to expect of them. Was right. So we do know what the harm that they cause on people. And the people that they cause this onto are people who usually have had trauma in their own life, have what we call anxious attachments, codependencies, and various other things, which eventually maybe we'll get into.
Hmm. It's okay.
So let's take a look at, I'm briefly going to talk about it, borderline personality. That's usually been associated mostly with women. And one of the reasons is because more women do go to therapy for it. Men usually don't. However, what I've recognized, even within our own culture and with, people that I work with, to me, there are more men that are borderline personality than there are narcissistic, but it's like disguised.
Why is that though? Why is that though?
Because with borderline, it actually is somewhat of a challenging diagnosis because it overlaps with other symptoms. And usually, if if an adolescent goes to therapy when they're younger, a lot of the times it's for some sort of behavioral issue that's going or concern that's going on. The most common is ADHD. Now, they will have that diagnosis throughout adolescence, teenage years and into adulthood. So they're thinking, I have ADHD. However,
Oh yeah.
most adolescents that are diagnosed with ADHD are actually borderline personality in adulthood. And the reason why it's in adulthood, it's because symptoms trigger, and it's also an age thing. Like you can't diagnose somebody with a certain diagnosis when it's an adult diagnosis, even though you recognize the symptoms that are there a long time ago. So in adulthood, men won't go to therapy. They're thinking, well, this is normal. This is how it's supposed to be. Like, say, when they get angry or their mood shifts, or
Hmm.
they have a tendency to be in and out of relationships, or it's like poor me. It depends, on the spectrum that they're on because there is a spectrum. And along with that diagnosis It is not uncommon for men to have a co occurring diagnosis of intermittent explosive disorder, traits of narcissistic personality disorder, and antisocial personality disorder, which is the most extreme. There are not many people that have that diagnosis. Why does this all matter and why am I bringing it up?
Yeah.
I actually brought it up because you're talking about your friend with the wedding. And as we started off with these expectations come out from somewhere. They develop or they are ingrained in us because of, various different reasons. Some of them do tie back to trauma because when you have an individual that has experienced trauma, they project that onto you. For example, your parents, either your mother or your father, was
Mm-hmm.
constantly yelled at when they're younger. They were not
Oh yeah.
physically abused, they were emotionally, psychologically. Maybe they were constantly yelled at and screamed at. Maybe when they got upset, a parent didn't really give them all the attention. Maybe sometimes they maybe gave them a hug when they needed it, and then other times they didn't. So it wasn't very consistent.
Yeah.
When it's sporadic like that, what the child learns is that I'm not sure if my parent's going to be there or if they're not going to be there. So what this does is it doesn't give that emotional need that that child needs. So
Mm-hmm.
they will become many of the time in distress, or they may actually even be anxious because they're not sure what to expect, right? So this when parents don't have a regular pattern of comforting their children, what it does create in that child in adolescence, early adulthood, and then into late adulthood is that that child usually is codependent. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
They may have fears of abandonment. They may be jealous. They may be people pleasers. They could also have low self esteem. They have problems trusting other people, and they may need constant validation. That's called anxious attachment. That develops with how your parents treat you emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
So those symptoms correlate to borderline personality disorder. Those are
Wow.
similar. There is a few more, but I can't get into
Can't
all of
get it. Yeah,
that
of
right now.
course.
Say when a child was angry
Mm-hmm.
and the parent reassured them and they maybe spoke to them through whatever they're feeling. But then again, next time it happened, they kind of dismissed it, like you'll get over it, you'll be fine. Nobody thinks about something like that because people say, well, I was there and when I was busy, I couldn't. But the impact that it has on somebody emotionally does not surface until adulthood. And people can follow these patterns. Is correct. There are extreme attachment styles. Those are not diagnoses. Additionally, in adulthood, someone who has an anxious attachment style, they may they may complicate relationships. They don't intentionally want to do, but they do it because they have such a fear of being abandoned and not being validated. When you hear people talk about their relationships and say, whether it's your, husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, whoever this may be, they'll say, wow, they always constantly are calling and texting me and, they don't stop, or
Mm-hmm.
they're always checking my social media, or they always want to know where I'm going with which friends I'm going with because of their insecurity. In addition to someone being anxious, we have what we call avoidant attachment style. So there wasn't emotional support by a parent. And what that means is the parent basically provided just what they needed to. They fed you, they clothed you, they took you to school, and they took you to the doctor when you needed. They didn't provide an emotional connection with you. Where remember, with the anxious, they did it on and off. With
Mm-hmm.
avoidant, they really did very little about it.
So you kind
So,
of knew what to expect almost from them, right?
somewhat, these are the kids where they're not going to be really upset if you leave them.
Mm-hmm.
They'll all stay with somebody else.
Got you. That
They
makes
don't
sense.
really have a preference between their parent and, like, let's say, a stranger.
They're like free-loathing, whatever it is, like pretty much just
Kind
like
of like
whoever
just, yeah, just
whoever
kind
will
of
give them
going
attention, pretty much, whatever it is.
somewhat, right, right, but they guard themselves at the same
Mm-hmm.
time. These kids, when they become angry or they cry, usually they're shamed for it. Stop crying, big boy. Or they're usually turning down or devaluing that child's emotion. And that's what happens to them. So now when these kids grow up, what happens is that they repeat the cycle. Even with anxious attachment, they do it to their partner and to their kids. There's one last one, which is the fearful avoidant, which is a combination of both of those two. This is the most extreme, severe. This is where basically there was total emotional neglect.
Total emotional neglect, like not
Yeah,
even acknowledging their kid of any sort, or just like bare minimum, or even below bare minimum.
pretty much bare because with this type of attachment style, that parent was not emotionally available. Where the first one, the parent also had an anxious attachment. The second one, the parent they picked and chose, right? When
Hmm.
they were available. This one, they're not available.
Gotcha.
Thank you for joining us today and being part of the show. Today I continued the conversation with John as we delve into learning about who he is and his journey of discovering himself. We spoke about what enmeshed families are, attachment styles, trauma, and living your authentic self. John is continuing to learn more about himself, recognizing what his role is in life. Is he following expectations more than he realizes? Continue and follow us. Join us on our next episode as we continue unraveling who John is.